Breaking news. Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
We'll start with that breaking news. The Boston bomber has now been convicted. But the question remains, will he die in prison or will he die by execution? After more than 11 hours of deliberations, jurors today found Dzhokhar Tsarnaev guilty on all 30 federal counts. Legal analysts say this is part of a deal that was basically already done. Now comes the sentencing phase, and the judge says that could start as early as next week. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's own lawyer admits that her client took part in the attack, but she also says the suspect's late brother was the real mastermind behind the attack, and that manhunt that left 4 people dead and more than 260 others hurt. Bottom line, it now comes down to whether jurors decide that life in prison is the appropriate punishment for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev or whether lethal injection is more fitting. We have 2 guests now to discuss what happens while we wait to hear from family members of the victims. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano is here in studio, and the criminal defense attorney Drew Findling is outside the courthouse in Boston. No emotion from him, huh, Drew?
Well, I got to tell you, Shep, that's one of those 6-1, half dozen the other. I've been involved in so many of these trials. If he shows too much of emotion, then everybody's going to say that he's feigning it. His lawyers prepped him for it. This guy is in the shock of this trial and the shock of this event. I would not expect him to be crying, particularly when the trial strategy was we're going to concede guilt right from the beginning. So the real emotion is going to be during the sentencing phase, which is going to commence next week.
Judge, what are we expecting there?
Well, the government has a burden of demonstrating to the jury that the statutory requirements for death have been met. There's about 26 what are called aggravating factors, aspects of his involvement in this that indicate death, the nature of plotting and planning, the victimless nature of the innocence of the victims, the particular horrific way in which it was done. His lawyers will argue the 25 or so mitigating factors, that he didn't have full consent of the will, that he was somehow under the thumb of the brother, that he has some sort of a mental derangement that prevented him from doing fully and freely what it is now apparent that he did do. The government has the burden of demonstrating that the aggravating factors, the things that made this horrific with respect to him, outweigh the mitigating factors, and then they have to demonstrate death by getting a unanimous vote. If it's 11-1 in favor of the death penalty is off the table. It has to be 12-0. And again, that's a recommendation to the court, which the court can accept or reject.
Drew, the lawyer here for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, Judy Clark, is very, very good at what she does. I guess after she represented Susan Smith and made it so that she did not face the death penalty, that's the mother who killed her children years ago and really sort of stunned the nation. Judy Clark has since then worked on these sorts of cases. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, comes to mind, and others, trying to keep Jared Loughner as well, trying to keep people away from the death penalty and to get life in prison. Drew, she's good at it.
Well, let me tell you something. If you went to the Justice Department right now and asked them who they think should be the lawyer for the defendant in this case, they'd say Judy Clark. That's how well respected she is. And what she's done is really pure genius, and that is she's conceding, as Judge Napolitano said, the aggravating factors. She's thrown in the towel on them. But what she has said from the beginning of guilt innocence, is the relative role in the case. Specifically, had the older brother been alive, there wouldn't be a death penalty case right now for the younger brother, because he would have gotten a life without parole and all efforts would have gone after the older brother. Just like, Shep, we saw in the D.C. sniper case. Remember, the 9 to 17-year-old, they just got life with parole. Same thing would have taken place here, except unfortunately for this defendant, his brother was killed.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it in that way,
well,
Judge.
Drew is right on the mark because he knows the law. So one of the mitigating factors is, think about this, another human being was more responsible for these deaths than my client. If she can make that argument to the jury, and that's a relatively easy argument to make using the government's own evidence, that is a substantial mitigating factor. That is a factor that indicates no death penalty. She very shrewdly saved her silver bullets, which is the argument I've just attempted to summarize, for the penalty phase. She did not fire any of those silver bullets and waste them during the guilt phase because she very shrewdly acknowledged the obvious. The evidence of guilt is overwhelming.
Though what you said the jury may buy completely that the older brother, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, is more responsible, if there is such a thing, than the younger brother, than the other brother here, Jakar. It was Jakar who we see on videotape putting this bomb down next to an innocent child standing along the finish line. That's not going to help.
She's going to have to address that, and she's going to have to address that probably not through his testimony, but through the testimony of experts who will say he was a robot when he did it. He did it not because he wanted to kill that beautiful, innocent 5-year-old boy, but he was terrified of what his brother would do to him if he didn't do it. And if the jury accepts that argument, and it's a lawful argument to make, that will indicate life in prison.
Drew, this same jury will take care of the penalty. Go ahead, Drew. You sorry?
No, well, and following up on Judge Napolitano, falling under the influence of the brother. I mean, again, she has paved the way right from the beginning. It's not that he didn't do these things, because these things are horrific. Anybody that would say they're not horrific is crazy. But she's going to say this is a 19-year-old that's from a dysfunctional family. The family is overseas. He's under the influence of this brother, and what he did is the responsibility of being brainwashed and convinced by an older brother. Some older brothers get you to do stupid things. This crazy, psychopathic older brother got him to do the ultimate revolting acts.
Drew, the jury, seven men, 5 women. One of those jurors, we learned in voir dire, is one who is against the death penalty, as a lot of Americans are, and you know it's a more liberal environment up there, and a lot of Massachusetts folks are. But she said she'd be willing or be able to consider the death penalty as a possible punishment if the circumstances warranted. I wonder what more you know about this jury or the way they've been acting in there.
Well, you know, what I bring to it is this. In order to get to be death qualified, you know, in so many trials, prosecutors, what they'll do is they pursue the death penalty just to get a guilty verdict because they want a death penalty qualified jury. That means a jury willing to come back with the death penalty, generally a more conservative jury. In this case, what you're looking for is that one person that is going to say, you know what, I'm satisfied with him being in jail 23 hours a day for the rest of his life, whether it's 10 or 70 more years. You want that one person that's convinced that that's the just punishment, and it takes one person to have the intestinal fortitude to hold out for a day, a week, or a month. And it's, as the judge said, going to be life without the possibility of parole.
Of course, life imprisonment is no walk in the park. He'll be in Florence, Colorado, which is where some of the other people that you just mentioned, Ted Kaczynski and Jared Loughner, are. The jail is 400 feet below the surface of the earth, and you're in a 6x8 jail cell for 23 hours a day. Look, the defense offered to plead guilty to all these charges in return for life without parole about a half dozen times, and the government said no. The government won't tell us what it spent on this case. Estimates range between $3 and $5 million to prosecute him. If this jury returns a verdict of life in prison, it'll be a colossal and monumental defeat for the government.
And we don't know specifically why the government decided to go that route. We know that there were some family members who were advocating for the death penalty, and certainly the wishes and wants of the family members are always taken into consideration here. But
Yes.
there's more than that, in that the government may have wanted to send a message to anybody else who might want to do this sort of thing. If you want to go up there and meet your maker, well, you know, we can take care of that if you do this.
The last poll that I saw, and these are polls, so you know they could be scientific or not, in Boston, was that only 25% of the populace wanted this guy to be executed. Not in favor of the death penalty, but they want Tsarnaev to be executed. So the government's job is a formidable one in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I saw that, and some people were saying we've had enough killing here. These are people who've been through a trauma that you and I can't know. They've lived through the Boston bombing. They were right there as it happened. Drew, your point was?
Well, you know, and that's what makes, from an intellectual standpoint, this such a crazy situation. We're in a state where the people do not want the death penalty. They have voted against the death penalty. So there was no option to pursue the death penalty in the Boston Marathon bombing case. Just a few miles down the road in the Aaron Hernandez case, they can't go for the death penalty. So here, what they've done is, in essence, in a legal way, gone through the back door with what they can't get through the front door. They're pursuing the death penalty in a jurisdiction where statewide they can't get it. So it's really, kind of a crazy scenario. And remember, these jurors are from this populace. These are the people of a state that do not, under any case, want the death penalty. It makes for a really crazy legal scenario.
I see it the same way. It's like you want to pursue the death penalty. You could have spared all of this heartache, all of this pain, all the reliving of all of this, because make no mistake, in the penalty phase of this, we are about to all, and those families particularly, are about to have to relive this thing in ways that are really hard to think about.
Well, you're exactly right. And Massachusetts hasn't had the death penalty since 1952.
Like most of the world has.
Right. Its last execution was in 1947. This is an extremely unpopular instrument there. And you know, because you and I were there, that the execution, for Tim McVeigh, the execution will have to take place in Indiana because it's against the law, even for the federal government, to execute anybody in Massachusetts. And the jurors are not deaf, dumb, and blind. They will know all this, and they are representatives of the community. But you're right, we are about to see another horrific phase of this trial. But this one will center on the space between Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's ears